everyone. My name is Kim Marie, and tonight it's evening where I'm at, wherever you're listening. Hello, any time of the day. We're going to talk on the surrender and rebirth process with Saturn and Uranus. And for those who are attending live while we are sharing this next hour, if you have any questions, you're welcome to either raise your hand, ask them live, or you're welcome to type questions into the chat area here on EA Zoom. I am perfectly fine with interruptions if there's something that's not clear for you. Now let me get this going. There we go. And so one of the basics in evolutionary astrology is what we call the cycle of phases and aspects. And if you look on your screen here, a circle has no beginning or end. So we create them, beginnings and endings in astrology. And if we would say Uranus is at the 0 point, over the process of this year, Saturn has been 3/4 of the way around the circle from Uranus, and it is actually making 3 last quarter squares at 270 degrees. And then it is going to spend the next several years, 6-7 years, in last quarter phase to Uranus. And if you look here on your screen, the last quarter square as an aspect and this phase is known in evolutionary astrology as a crisis in consciousness or beliefs. I'm going to get my pointer out for you so that when I'm speaking, it can help a little bit. And so what we also will recognize from the 270-degree mark is we are starting to finish up the cycle of any 2 planets together. And as we are finishing up these last 90 degrees, in this whole quadrant right here, there is a coming to terms with anything that's unfinished. There is the need to heal any karma. There's a need to have deeper understandings between 2 planets. And as we are letting go and bringing things to completion, as we move more and more through that cycle and Saturn catches up to Uranus, for each little ending we make, we can have some seed thoughts that will be initiated in a new cycle when Saturn conjuncts Uranus, which, by the way, isn't going to be until 2032. I'll show you that in a future screen here. And so this is why I created that title, the surrender. This last quarter is where the faster moving planet is learning to surrender to the slower moving planet, but also there are chances for rebirth. So while we will have with last quarter phase, this crisis in consciousness or what to believe or how to make sense of anything between 2 planets, we also will get those little sparks, those little ideas that will start to come through of how we want to move forward simultaneously as we are finishing up. Now we will work with this specifically with Saturn and Uranus as we move forward. Just kind of wanted to explain that phase in general for you, okay? And so when we look at Saturn and Uranus together as a planetary pair in cycle with each other, key phrase, it is the interface of the individuated consciousness and unconsciousness. So Saturn in EA is known as the structure of our individuated consciousness. It is the boundaries of what we will know on a conscious level within our soul. It's what we can easily access. And Saturn and its relationship to space and time, we can consciously work with yesterday. We can consciously work with a decade ago. We can consciously work with things from our childhood. Uranus is the individuated unconsciousness. And so when something drops from our awareness, it's not gone. It's, in the Akashic records forever, but it drops down below that immediacy of what we can access. And so Uranus is the archetype that contains the past in all its detail, including past lives when we access that. It contains anything that Saturn wants to push away and suppress and not work through. And it also contains the future potentials for each of us as an individual soul basis. And so what we have then as Saturn and Uranus come together, what I call that natural tug of war between the societal pressures to conform, Saturn, and our own individuation process, Uranus. And so they're always going back and forth with each other in how am I going to fit into society and how am I going to be me? And they have a 45-year cycle together. And so it is possible to grasp that 45-year cycle. It's a stretch, but we can do it. And many of us will most likely live through a 45-year cycle with Saturn and Uranus. We may even live through 2 of those cycles if we are blessed in any given lifetime. And so we're going to go back and forth in talking about this planetary pair on an individual basis, and then we're also going to do it on a collective basis as well. And so what we will find with this 45-year cycle is it is the evolution of technology, inventions, societal customs and taboos, authority structures, and even our governments and how we run those. Those are just a few keywords. It's, there's more to these planets, but we're going to try and keep this to an hour, okay? So you kind of get the habit of or the insight of what I'm speaking about here. And so collectively, any group of people, be it a cultural group, a religious group, a country, a area or region, a state or a province in North America, all groups evolve over time. They all change. And Saturn and Uranus can be one of the ways that we really can observe how groups of people evolve. One of the things that tends to happen, though, with Saturn and Uranus as a planetary pair, innovations happen faster than the laws can govern. Facebook, anybody? I do have Facebook IPO here and just a minute for us, but think about this in general, well, not just social media, but whether we're talking medical advances, whether we are talking perhaps about music, you can pick your subject and we will see innovation or evolution again come along a little bit faster than what our laws can govern and catch up with. And so when Saturn and Uranus especially make one of these conjunctions, oppositions, or squares to each other, it is an intense time period where the laws or the customs and rules try to catch up with technology. Now, here were the conjunctions, as you see on your screen, from the last Saturn-Uranus initiations. We had 3 conjunctions in 1988, and they took place between 28 and 30 degrees of Sagittarius. Now, for you, those of you who study astrology, these conjunctions occurred at the galactic center of our Milky Way galaxy. Beginners to astrology, we know that the sun is the center of our solar system, and without the life-giving energy of the sun, nothing would be here in existence. Well, when you think of our Milky Way galaxy, that is, and we go to the center of that Milky Way galaxy. It is like, again, that life-giving force for our whole entire galaxy. And right now, that center tends to be in those late degrees of Sagittarius in the tropical zodiac. So just the fact that their last cycle initiated in those late degrees of Sagittarius, it gives us a coloring, a flavor, a imprint that's going to last through the entire cycle of them together. And so with the archetype of Sagittarius, it's that potential to understand what we in EA call natural law, or those timeless universal laws. And there is that potential to have a deep insight into sustainability on planet Earth. Look at how we've become aware of that since the late 1980s. And look at how intensely we've become aware of climate change as Saturn and Uranus have been making last quarter squares this year. I'll show you those next. And so we're also becoming conscious, Saturn, that all these technological advances that we humans have made via Uranus, they are threatening the survival of all species on planet Earth. And that survival mechanism becomes Saturn. Saturn is also that archetype of mortality and life and death. So this is one of the major themes of this Uranus cycle with Saturn. Another one that I like to point out to you, and this also relates to this archetype of Sagittarius, is truth versus lies in all our different areas of life, even going beyond our belief systems. Just look at how mass communications has exploded since the late 80s with computers and the internet and our cell phones. Yes, there's other things going on, the Uranus-Neptune conjunctions in 1993 that happened in Capricorn, but we also have the Saturn-Uranus impact to it as well. Look at social media. And this is something that hit on me as I was prepping for this talk. In many ways, there's a lot of people on the planet for whom social media could be replacing religion, because now we've got everything available to us on our little handy devices, and we can look something up to see whether or not it is a truth for us. We can dial in to the various medias that will give us an interpretation of things according to the way we want to know it, or we want to interpret it. Think liberal and conservative right now if you want. And so it's real interesting to watch how this Uranian technology is affecting our choices in beliefs, these conjunctions in Sag. Now, one of the big distortions that we have going on, especially in the United States, is blindly believing lies over facts that are visible, that are, you can consciously just acknowledge them. Nope, the election was stolen from Donald Trump. Just get the point. Now, this Sagittarian flavor to this current Saturn-Uranus cycle will last until their next conjunction. And you can see here on the bottom of your screen, they're only going to meet once in 2032 at 28 degrees Gemini in late Gemini. We'll save that conversation for another day. But I think you get this idea of what I'm speaking about with the initiations of Saturn and Uranus. Now, because I've been talking about how the consensus world will sometimes blindly believe something in spite of the facts, I thought I would just quickly share a little screen from the perspective of evolutionary astrology. And that is the fact that evolutionary states of consciousness within souls are not better than or less than. over the years of my 3+ decades with EA, I've, had people come at us and they will have that instinctive, repulsion that, well, you're just doing better than less than. No, 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 no. You can see on your screen that evolutionary states are not known by the birth chart alone. They must be observed and correlated through context with that individual soul. I also want to point out that these percentages are approximations for our current time period or the ending of the Piscean age. So approximately 7 out of 10 souls are what we call consensus. Jeffrey Green would say cowbells around their neck. They cannot step outside the space-time that they were born into. This is why evolution takes so long, because this is the group. They're the vast majority. They make the rules, but they are within the individuated state of consciousness. You can look at this as the dropping a rock in water and those ripples expanding out in awareness. And so approximately 2 out of 10 people, as I like to say, individuating. I'm going to think for myself what is truth or what is a lie in any given situation. And then we expand out into the spirituated state of consciousness, approximately 1 out of 10 souls on planet Earth who can relate to those Sagittarian, timeless truths that have always existed. And so universal truth, we can distort it, we can suppress it, we cannot destroy it. And one of the intents of Saturn and Uranus in this current cycle together is to know truth. And so perhaps we can have patience with consensus souls as they are having to, in various ways, wake up, especially through Saturn and Aquarius, as to what is facts and what is not, what is truth and what is not. So I just thought I'd pop this in here for any of you who are new to EA. Now, as we were saying, last quarter squares are a crises in consciousness, and here's the 3 dates. We've already been through 2 of them, Saturn in Aquarius, last quarter squares to Uranus in Taurus these days. In many ways, it can boil down to these last quarter squares, as well as this last quarter's phase that these 2 planets are going to be in for the next 6-7 years. They are many times the debates between inclusiveness versus exclusiveness, whether we're talking those beliefs, laws, norms, policies, races, social support systems. Take your issue. And just for your awareness, inclusive is giving, sharing, and including, what in EA we will many times call natural law. Exclusive is the human-made distortions of taking, hoarding, and excluding. You can just choose your subject and see where we are recognizing extremes of wealth inequality right now with Uranus and Taurus. And so this is really becoming more and more into the picture of, are we going to be inclusive of others, or are we going to continue to exclude? Keep out the immigrants on our southern border. Take your picks, Palestine and Israel. You can see it all over in consensus consciousness, no matter what country you may happen to reside in. Another thing that goes on between Saturn and Uranus, but gets accentuated with last quarter square and phase, is the tug of war between societal innovations and current societal structures. Meaning, are we going to move forward or stay in the comfort zone, or even try to go back to the past? Now, what we're going to find happening, because Saturn is the faster moving planet with the last quarter squares here, is it's surrendering more and more to Uranus. Uranus will have the last and final word. And so we're going to recognize all kinds of outdated social support systems that are in need of reform. And I thought this was a really nice Saturn Uranus phrase. How many of you have ever heard? Necessity is the mother of all invention. Necessity, Saturn, how are we going to survive? Mother of all invention, Uranus, coming up with something new. I'll share a couple of things with you here as we move forward, in which I think societal innovations will have the final word. It will just be the question of when, not if. And so these last quarter squares between them, they're going to create crises in many collective societal areas. With Uranus and Taurus, the whole issue of land conservation. If you're not aware of this, I think it's called the Land Institute out of Kansas. It was created by Wes Jackson. They are taking our annual grains and using Uranian technology to create them into being perennial grains. The most famous one is taking wheat and turning it into kurzna, which is a word they made up, but making a perennial a grain out of wheat. They're trying to do this with all kinds of annual seeds so that we can create these deep tap roots down to the earth and not, lose all our soil, Taurus being that physical earth. And so that kind of stuff is coming in the news, and it's changing farming techniques. I was the oldest of three on a farm. I didn't get off a tractor till I was 26. Every day or every year you would till the soil and churn everything up with the discs and then replant it. We don't do that anymore. Even that's been changing. But look at how food supplies, the disruptions that happened last year with the virus. And so we can have more of this as Uranus finishes up in Taurus and Saturn is last quarter's phase to that. We're realizing we don't have nutrition and food anymore. I don't think I have to say much about Earth events other than we're going to have innovations so that the structures we build last through these climate change events better and better. Hempcrete, anybody? And of course, money, banking and regulations, those good old cryptocurrencies that we're finding. This stuff's going to continue to be in the news through the rest of this decade between these two planets. Stay tuned. We'll see how things turn out. I do have some ideas on that I'll show you. Social media regulations, increased fracturing of news sources. These are just some of the many ideas. The last quarter square can also bring technological revolutions. Because even though it's a crisis over what to think and what to believe, there can still be manifestations. Saturn and Uranus have done 3/4 of a circle together. They've got it. They're getting it. And so things that were seed thoughts in crescent phase or gibbous phase, they can still have manifestations throughout last quarter phase. Technology is not going to take a break just because they are in the last 90 degrees of their cycle together. But another major issue that I think will come, we're seeing it in the last quarter squares, we'll see it through the phase, is all kinds of survival crises that will force us to consider new choices for food, clothing, and shelter. How do we all have enough to eat? How do we all have sustainable places to live? There's been articles in the last year about how The United States, 4.5% of the world's population, uses 25% of the world's resources. How throwaway we are in regards to clothes. Probably get that one. What we can be looking at in this last quarter phase, though, is increasing battles around resources, around all three of these areas, and the extremes of wealth by the 1% versus others who, in other parts of the country and the world, just trying to put food on the table. Now, here's a nice one. Here's a positive, hopeful one. Water. This is one of my heroines, Ellen Brown. And hopefully, if you're watching this on YouTube, this might be a direct link that you can click on, or maybe you can hopefully copy and paste, or at least go to her website and look for this article. She just recently published an article on primary water sources and cycles. And I'll just read to you right here. This is coming from the Primary Water Institute. You can go to their website. You can support them if you want to. But the primary hydraulic or water cycle is driven by earth energy. You see, this is the red circle that you're seeing on your screen versus the atmospheric one that we think is the only water cycle that we have. Primary water is created deep within the earth from the synthesis of hydrogen and oxygen. Under tremendous pressure from the earth's internal heat, H2O in the form of vapor is forced upward through rock fissures. This is this light blue that you see right here. In other words, those rock fissures are the weakest areas of the Earth's crust. And as this vapor comes up and it cools, it becomes liquid. So primary water is forced upward from within the earth, while atmospheric water is subject to the effects of gravity and flows downward. So this is something that, as we continue with all the effects of climate change that we see going on, this will become more and more in the news. And you do not have to have deep, deep wells to get to primary water. It fissures out through volcanic eruptions. It comes up to the Earth's surface in various ways. And so we can have actually kind of shallow primary water wells. Now, big question, Saturn last quarter square to Uranus, is who's going to try and tap into that water and control it? Will we utilize it for the best interests of all? What we are seeing, and especially over this last decade or so, is a lot of the atmospheric water sources, lakes and rivers and streams. A lot of our billionaires have been buying up all of those water rights, thinking that they can control it, make money off of it. Let's see what Uranus and Taurus has to say about that over the next few years. Now, I wanted to just talk a little bit about Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus relative to these last quarter squares. Saturn in Aquarius will be there all the way through next year, 2022, and into the spring of 23. But Saturn in Aquarius is about breaking free, Aquarius, from consensus conditioning, Saturn, and liberating Aquarius, both individually and collectively. Now, remember that consensus consciousness, not guaranteed to happen, because that emotional security may be such a deep need that somebody, suppresses or repels against making change. What will happen is if we have some evolutionary resistance to Saturn and Aquarius evolutions, is it can increase trauma. Trauma is an Aquarius archetype. Here's Saturn that wants security and structure in the sign that Uranus rules. Saturn in Aquarius is being tugged to open, change and evolve, rebel, individuate. But if we resist that, then we can bring about trauma. And the last quarter squares can be situations that can increase that trauma. And in EA, we define trauma, an intense disturbance caused by a shocking event or stress. And it can be of a spiritual, mental, emotional, or physical nature. It doesn't have to just be mental. But the key thing is that intense disturbance has a lasting effect. Now, the broadest intent of Saturn in Aquarius is for traumas of the past, this life and past lives, to resurface into consciousness in order to heal those wounds on every level. Now, it requires us to make a persistent effort. This is where the fixed air of Aquarius and the fixed earth of Uranus and Taurus, the fixed modality is persistence. So we've got that potential to make that concerted effort to heal. And if the last quarter squares are creating these crises in our lives and creating trauma or revisiting trauma, there is huge potential to become aware of why this is happening and how do we change it. In other words, instead of doing that Saturnian suppression one more time, we can make efforts to change from the intensity of what has happened. Saturn in Aquarius does not mean that consensus society may necessarily understand. If we have consensus groups of people that live through a intense hurricane, or let me just give you a little example, live through a forest fire. We had a small in perspective to California, but we had a forest fire the end of March within a half a mile of my house. For 3 nights, my husband and I had all of our important things packed in our 2 vehicles waiting to be evacuated. Talk about the clarity of getting your Taurian values in place. I had a box of photos. I had we had our laptops. I had my jewelry. I had a few clothes. Kitties went to grandma's house across town. 3 nights. The first night we looked out our bedroom window and watched the flames a half a mile away. Never got evacuated, but that was I hope I don't ever come closer to that kind of an event again. But point is, when consensus society goes through cataclysmic experiences and events, it is a condensed point in time that they can make that big aha, that Aquarian lightning flash moment. But we can also take that Saturnian suppression and just ignore it. We get past the intensity of the last quarter squares and we fade into, oh, well, that didn't happen. If we don't want to take the effort to understand, we can repeat the event, we can repeat the pattern. And especially on a collective level, we repeat it until enough of consensus gets it and we break the pattern. This is the potential with these last quarter squares and even through their last quarter phase. Stay tuned. We'll see how this happens, how this goes along. Most of society was recognizing that it's not does climate change exist, it's not an if, it does exist. Now, how are we going to address it? There can be massive uprisings through these squares and this phasal relationship to redistribute resources. Uranus in Taurus, to change some of these governmental institutions, Saturn, to make them more equitable for others, Saturn in Aquarius. Now, the degrees of the rebellions will relate to the degrees that authority does its power grabs. Sometimes the rebellions will be successful and sometimes they will not. It's just going to be individual circumstances with various groups, with various countries, states, provinces, in how things happen to change. We know that the intent of Aquarius and the coming Aquarian age and Saturn in Aquarius is to create social equality and unity and diversity. Unity and diversity is the key phrase of the Aquarian age. And no, astrology doesn't have a specific date to these 2000, 2100 year cycles. Are we shifting out of the Piscean age into the Aquarian age? Definitely. Definitely we are. Remember, the Aquarian archetype is going to push whatever is suppressed by Saturn back into consciousness for Saturn until we address it. And so for all of us, if we can sometimes just take a moment and reflect what needs to change in our world. And as all of us as individuals experience these Saturn last quarter squares to Uranus throughout 21, coming off of the virus and the contagions physically, contagions mentally. Contagion is an Aquarius word. As we come off of the intensity of our own personal individual events, if we'll take time to reflect, it can allow us to recognize what needs to be changed in our world. I have South Node in Taurus. I've had Uranus sitting on it. I've had Saturn squaring my nodal axis. One of the things that my husband and I realized through the close brush with fire is we got a lot of stuff after 20 years together that we don't need this, honey. We don't need this. And so, methodically going through the closet and recycling, not throwing away clothing that we don't use anymore. Recycling as much as I can with stuff, Taurus, that we don't need. All of us can be doing some of that with these last quarter squares as well, if we can choose to reflect, make the effort, and go forward with it. Another intent of Saturn in Aquarius is to liberate. And liberation on an egoic basis requires the courage to be a group of one when necessary, to individuate and change however evolution is presenting itself to us in our personal world. And here again, just want to point out to you, individuals and groups with Saturn and Aquarius will fall into three categories towards evolution. Those who want to charge forward, the avant-gardes, the rebels, progressive visionaries, as they take the Uranian choice. Those who want to defend the past, the consensus consciousness, those who are very security conscious, they're Saturn. And we have those who sway back and forth in the middle. They can be undecided or uninformed. They have a mixture, and they'll go with whatever the news of the day is or whatever group they happen to be associating with, and they will change some, resist some. That's how most of us actually operate. Even when we're individuating and spirituating, it takes quite a bit of courage to make major changes in our life. It's easier to change a little, rest, change a little, rest. It's sometimes those big events, that last quarter squares, that get us to make these leaps. And so evolution is a continual interface between these three cycles that we see right here. And so these last quarter squares between Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus and Taurus, it's going to bring about a whole mixture of this. How can we break free and individually? However, it is necessary for us to do. Now, this is an Uranian and Aquarian slide. I put it in because even though it's fixed air, it is about moving forward. And it's detach, objectify, individuate, innovate. One more time. It takes courage to be a group of one and liberate into our unique individual soul nature. And Saturn last quarter squares to Uranus are asking us to let go of whatever doesn't work for us in consensus society anymore. What doesn't bring us Taurian meaning and value. We're being asked to let it go, let it go, let it go. And it'll be different for each of us exactly what that is. And we will also do that as groups. And so I have just a couple of, one more slide, and then we'll go into Uranus and Taurus. This is a slide that I created from the Uranus-Neptune conjunctions back in, that happened in 1993. 3 of them, 19 to 20 degrees Capricorn. And together, Uranus and Neptune are a 172-year cycle of, for me, spiritual liberation. However, because their conjunctions happened in Capricorn, and we have 3 of them. We had the one in the 1820s, we have this one in the 1990s, and we have another one that's going to come in the 2100s at some point. All 3 of those Uranus-Neptune conjunctions are in Capricorn. I also think that just Saturn and Uranus, because Saturn rules that physical world, they also are involved. And so anytime we have planets ingress into Aquarius, Jupiter did, Saturn's there, Pluto's going to come there 23, 24 for 2 decades. Aquarian ingresses of slower planets always bring leaps of growth in technology and mental awareness. That's where we get that feeling that time is moving faster. Saturn in Aquarius can feel like time is moving faster. Well, conventional computing, those are our calculators. Those are the computers that we know, binary. We store and compute 1 or 0 with transistors or switches. And so we create these integrated circuits, transistors, computers. And right now we've got about as small as the laws of physics, Saturn, physical, can make them. But what are we doing now? We are starting to learn how to do quantum computing with atoms and subatomic particles. With quantum computing, we can store multiple values at the same time, 1, 0, both, or anything in between. Quantum mechanics allow computers to work parallel instead of serial, work at the same time, not 1 + 1 + 1. The example of quantum computing that most of us can perhaps understand, quantum physics, is that light can be both the particle and the wave. Einstein, anybody? And so what we're beginning to see is the beginnings of artificial intelligence. And with Saturn and Uranus, it is how do we take that Uranian technology and ground it into the physical, Saturn. And, you just take the world of medicine right now and all the things that are going on in that regard. At some point, we'll be able to wave a wand over ourselves and do all of our own testing and evaluating, all kinds of ideas if you care to go look on the internet to find that kind of stuff. And so I think that Saturn's last quarter squares to Uranus are bringing a quickening in this area, but it's also bringing a crisis in beliefs. And again, innovation faster than laws can keep up. So how are we going to make those ethical laws of what we're working with here? Now, a couple slides on Uranus and Taurus. Basically, it is revolutionizing self-reliance. I rely on myself for all my needs. And it does this via exposing insecurities. Taurus wants to be secure. And through Uranus's 7-year transit in Taurus, from time to time, we're going to have that rug of outer security pulled out from underneath us, the Scorpio polarity shocks, and it will turn us inward to find that deeper self-reliance and inner security. Now, the degree to which we are insecure is the degree to which we will resist Taurus, fixed earth, in which we'll want inertia or we'll want to control and be possessive. And so what we have with Uranus and Taurus is the desire to be secure is at odds with the impulse to evolve. And the evolving forces, Uranus, will overcome the resisting forces, Taurus. And so there is an intent here to develop inner security, regardless of your outer circumstances. Don't care what your job is, what your relationship situation is, where you live on planet Earth, how much you have or you don't have, it's developing it in here. So we're evolving an inner relationship with ourselves and the environment in which we find ourselves. Taurian words: self-love, self-acceptance, self-worth, self-reliance. Again, I rely on myself to meet my needs. Those outer relationships, the Venus rulership of Libra versus Venus rulership of Taurus, those outer relationships are only going to be as good as our relationship with ourselves. Okay, so the last quarter squares of Saturn, Uranus, they can be creating crises in our relationships. You think of the polarity Scorpio and the merging with another. You think of the polarity Leo and love, who will love me. There can be crises in intimate relationships, and we can be going through a reevaluation of what's important to us and what we want to change in our intimate relationships if we're in one, what we want to change in our friendships, Uranus, Aquarius. We can collectively, as groups of people, be evaluating how we want to relate to other groups of people. You think there's any racial strife going on right now? Well, you can see it all around you, and it may be going on in other planets and beyond just the United States. Uranus and Taurus is also triggering survival instincts for every species on planet Earth. Some species are not making it because of our human interference. But even all of us in various ways are going to be going through this, and it's only going to be intensifying through Saturn's last 90 degrees with Uranus. And where do we live? How do we be safe? All over the planet, we're going to be looking at this. So we've got both physical and biological survival going on here. And again, there are some species who won't be making it. For all we know, with the technological innovations, we might be able to take DNA and make a woolly mammoth. Stay tuned. I think it's only a matter of time. And so Uranus and Taurus is going to revolutionize our relationships with resources. No choice, for survival reasons, but also for the value reasons. And so back to those evolutionary states of consciousness, consensus, it's all about my bank account. It's all about my material resources and how much I can accumulate to feel safe. Individuating consciousness is recognized recognizing the ultimate is source itself, universal source. And that is the ultimate value as well. And so we'll all have our individual ways in which our relationships to resources are changing. We'll have our collective ways in which those relationships are changing. We will also have sexuality shakeups and revolutions. It's not just Pluto transiting Capricorn that is bringing up the anima-animus gender situations. So is Uranus and Taurus. And self-reliance includes sexual self-satisfaction, taking that out of the taboo area and recognizing it is a natural part of the human condition. So the LBGT changing our views around sexuality, loving the soul first, the body second. And it also is having to do with the sexual equality and fairness, such as the Me Too movement. Outer squares phase of Saturn and Uranus can accentuate some of this stuff. Perhaps Donald Trump is going to have a rape lawsuit go forward from years ago. It also is bringing long-term potential to develop new talents. Taurus is talents, because what we are talented in allows us to survive. And so we can develop new talents into jobs and careers and the ability to accumulate resources, survival resources of food, clothing, and shelter, but also personal resources compared to what is valued by us. And of course, I'm skipping ahead on my slides. I just wanted to briefly, you can just look at this. I'm looking at time here. I got a few more slides left. Uranus and Taurus the last time was the dirty 30s. I was raised in the Northern Plains. I live in the Northern Plains, even though I'm in a small little mountain range. I had parents who came up through what we call the dirty 30s here. But look at everything that happened with Uranus and Taurus the last cycle it was in there. Social Security, a wealth tax that was taken away, maybe it'll come back. A 40-hour work week, not establishing that very much. Biggest dam in the world at that time. Nylon stockings. You kind of get the point with Uranus and Taurus here. We'll see what Saturn and Uranus continue to create together in the next few years. We'll look back on that, okay? But here's something I wanted to, again, Ellen Brown is my heroine. I highly, highly recommend this book, Banking on the People. And she goes through all the different various ways that we can work with money as a resource, and pros and cons of cryptocurrencies, pros and cons of everything. She is the one, she was one of the co-founders of the publicbankinginstitute.org. And so public bank credit, the interest, the income, return to the public. Private bank credit, return to CEOs and shareholders. I live in South Dakota. Our twin, North Dakota, back in 1919, 102 years ago, created the Bank of North Dakota. It operates as a mini Fed. This state, which does not have a very big population, okay? I think it is the second least populated state. We're third, Wyoming is first. North Dakota has 7 times more banks per capita than any other state because it partners with private commercial banks. The return on North Dakota's investments every year outbeats Wall Street every year. This state is sitting on almost $5 billion in cash. 750,000 people, maybe consensus, maybe they're approaching 800,000. It is not the oil. You know, we've had depressed oil prices until very recently. You can go search it. I highly recommend this. And I think that Uranus and Taurus is going to bring this about. And the last quarter squares, the last quarter phase, even balsamic phase of Saturn to Uranus is increasing this awareness of, you know, half of anything we build goes to interest today, almost anywhere in the world. And so this public banking movement, I highly, highly recommend it. And so I just got a couple more slides left. I thought I would look at Mark Zuckerberg tonight. He's never given out his time. And in a recent NCGR newsletter, someone brought to my attention that on this Astrology site, Canon McAfee, I don't know whether that is male or female, but they have rectified Zuckerberg's chart to 10:04 p.m. You see that as the inner wheel. The last Saturn Uranus square, last quarter square, is going to be Christmas Eve this year, and that is the outer wheel. If it is 10:04 p.m., he's at 10th house Pluto at 005 Scorpio, going to be that degree and minute regardless of the time. But if he's a 10th house Pluto, Capricorn soul, there's that resource accumulation. Here's the resources with Scorpio Taurus. Well, look at what the Saturn last quarter squares to Uranus are doing with his chart. Saturn is making squares to these Scorpio Taurus planets. Uranus is going over the Taurus planets and opposing the Scorpio planets. You might be aware that he's been in the news recently because there was a female whistleblower who ended up on 60 Minutes who said that Facebook consistently puts human safety, Uranus and Taurus, over, or I mean, excuse me, they consistently put profits over human safety. Uranus and Taurus for both of them. But isn't this interesting to see what's going on? And as you look over it through here, and Saturn moves through that last quarter phase, I think he's going to be in a little bit of trouble here. It'll be interesting to see how this turns out. There are other things going on in the chart as well, obviously. He's just had a nodal axis return. The truth versus lies theme is coming out and being exposed. And here's one more chart for you. This is the initial public offering when he took Facebook public. And this was on May 18th, 2012. We do have a time for that. Also, some Taurian planets here. You know, he did it just days after his birthday. And we also have Saturn and Uranus hitting upon those Taurian planets. Now, when I listed the transits to Saturn and the transits to Uranus, I only listed the ones that would have the 3 passages with the retrograde, all right? Some of them are only going to, you know, some of these hits with Saturn will only happen once. But as you can see, even with this chart and the Taurian planets here, this last quarter square is hitting Facebook as well. Somebody said when, I'm going to just take this off the top of my head. Mark Zuckerberg averages between the 3rd, fourth or fifth richest person in the United States. I think right now he's fifth richest in the world. And when all that news hit in this last week about Facebook, I want to say in a space, it was either a week, his net worth dropped $40 billion. Whew, talk about a last quarter square between Saturn and Uranus and the need for some redistribution of income here. Just wanted to briefly touch upon these charts. We can go back to them. I was looking at them with time. So, here we've got all these, rich billionaires in the United States doing all their little flights into space. This was Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin that took Captain Kirk, William Shatner out to space. And my husband Leroy called me cynical because I caught a glimpse of it on TV. He was fascinated by it, the whole space thing. And I'm sitting there going, well, if I was in charge of the world, I would take all the money that they spent on that, and I would give it equal amount of that money to the Department of Peace and to those who, don't know how to put food on the table or don't have food hunger. Saturn last quarter square to Uranus. Chances are with our human conditionings, we aren't going to be close to eliminating world hunger. Give me my freedom, Uranus. But I do hope that as we look at these extremes of wealth, I do really hope before Uranus gets out of Taurus, we can make some changes in that arena. And this is where we can put Saturn to good use. So just because the past didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, doesn't mean your future can't be better than you imagined. Oh, may it be so. All right, so that is all my slides. I will just end with my little housekeeping slide of who I am and what I offer if you're interested. No interruptions, questions from anybody, comments, anything else you want to look at with Zuckerberg's chart? Anything I didn't address that you are interested in?
Well, while everybody's thinking, I'm going to just say that was awesome, Kim Marie. I just love the way you sum it all up and tell it like it is.
I have a lot of Scorpio Sag. Okay.
Okay.
No, get to the bottom line. No BS.
That sounds good. And if you would get the all these links to me, I'll put it in the description on YouTube.
Oh, sure. I can easily do that, Sue. I think I have your email address. If not, I'll PM you on Facebook.
Perfect.
I want to close and say that Sue, Robin, I would still like to do a webinar on the 2022 Pluto returns with a focus on, I'm working with a new chart for the United States. And so I would still be very happy to do a public webinar on that and to look at the dates that we have those 3 transiting Pluto conjunctions to the natal US chart. So just offering that up for a future EA Zoom meeting if you'd like.
Awesome.
Sounds
Awesome.
good, Anne-Marie.
Mhm.
So does
All
anybody have any questions for Kim Marie before she wraps it up?
Well, I would like to ask one thing. Because of in the chart of the United States, like there is the Pluto return, and it is almost at the same time than the square between Uranus and Saturn. So that you didn't make any link between the two of them, but I'm curious about it.
I chose, because of time constraints, to specifically not bring that into the picture, which is also why I'm offering to do another webinar that is specifically on the US Pluto return. It's a subject that I have been interested in for many years. I'm sure many astrologers have. This is from and oh God, I want to say it was NCGR, but it might have been ESAR. Michael Munkasey, if I'm pronouncing his name right. He had an article a couple of years ago in regards to his research on what he thought was the birth time for the United States. And hold on, I'm going to see. I don't think I have that article handy right now. I'm pretty sure it was NCGR again, and it was in one of their newsletters. It was from 2019. And after I read that article, I just kind of thought, boy, I got to look into this. And so I kind of been looking at this chart for a couple of years, and I have switched over to it. Now, mind you, doesn't matter what time on July 4th, 1776 happened, we have Uranus at, 8-9 degrees Gemini. So it fits with the Twin Towers collapse of 9/11. Okay. And so as we are looking at, Uranus hanging out in Taurus, in this chart, it is in that 9th Sag house. Okay. Whereas Saturn is hanging out here from 6th to 5th with the retrograde cycle. Saturn just went direct October 10th, 21 at 6:53 Aquarius. And so what we've had over these last couple of years, as Saturn's been approaching this last quarter square, is Uranus squaring the nodal axis of the US chart. And that's going to be true anytime on July 4th. And we've had Saturn going over that south node. And one of the things that I really feel about the US chart with this T-square between Mercury, Pluto, only 2 retrograde planets with Chiron, the Sun square to Saturn, and the Mars square to Neptune. I think that those squares and oppositions describe how the US has had cycles of being inclusive versus exclusive. Give me you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, says Lady Liberty, and build a wall. And so we go through these ways, including excluding in this country. And, whether it's immigrants, whether it's LGBTQ, there's all kinds of various areas in the United States right now where we have this inclusive versus exclusive battle that is going on. I think that Saturn over the South Node, which is the ego of the past of our collective group in this country. Thank you, international listeners. I'm a US citizen. It's been bringing up our past. Look at the critical race theory. It has exploded here in my conservative state of South Dakota, and our governor is Kristi Noem. And our state constitution says that every so many years, there has to be a review of social studies in our education system. And so the committee was like a group of about 50 people from all walks of life, and they met and reviewed how things need to evolve and came up with what they thought were very nonpartisan standards for teaching social studies in this state. And our governor, Kristi Noem, took her Department of Education and had them wipe out anything that she felt promoted critical race theory. So all over this country, we're having to review how we see ourselves. And we've got the consensus world, Uranus up here in Taurus in the 9th house with this chart saying, my beliefs say that I am just going to ignore all this stuff. And so the Saturn Uranus squares in the US are going. Are we going to include or exclude? Are we going to go with the truth or believe a big lie? So for the woman who asked the question, does this kind of get to the point or help with your question?
Yes, thank you. No, I'm Canadian. And of course, here we have the same thing happening with the Native people and all of those children that were, discovered, buried, and that they have. So, it's a big heart shock, like we really feel shaken in our sources and in our roots, definitively, that it is like a big moment. The discovery is very, very strong. Yeah.
I live in a city that had an Indian boarding school. I actually am only a couple of miles away from it. In my state, South Dakota, we have 9 reservations. 10% of our population is Native American. In the city I live in, Rapid City, 25% of our population is Native. And we have this creek called Rapid Creek that runs through our city. And when our Indian boarding school was created by that creek, and all of the Native Americans built their teepees along the creek by the boarding school to be close to their children. The government back in the 1930s and 40s finagled a way to give all that native land around our up and down our creek to churches, to schools, and to the National Guard. And there is a Native group in my community that sued through the federal government, and the case was decided in their favor. And my city, Rapid City, is going through negotiations to trade land back to the natives. And we just, we were the first state that took Columbus Day and made it Native American Day. And so last Monday, a few days ago, for the last few years, there's been a native walk around that boarding school. And they're going to create a native park and cultural center, community center around the hillside where they think all the children are buried. We haven't done what do you call, I'm going to say ultrasound, but where you're measuring the ground to see where they're buried. We haven't gotten that far yet, but there's been a huge healing step. And in spite of my conservative state, we have a very progressive mayor, and he has been all on board with this. And it's heartbreaking, but it's also heartwarming that they are getting this park and this memorial and big cultural center to honor the wrong. Let's say it that way. So yes, I think it is more of, especially transiting Saturn, even though it only made one passage, it doesn't mean that its effect was any less. It's stationary direct standing on the south node. And so Aquarius distorted can be extremely elitist. You know, I'm better than you. It can do the extreme opposite of unity and diversity. Thank you for sharing your Canadian perspective. I've heard about it in the news quite often, actually, just because of our local community. Anyone else, comments or questions?
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Anyone else, comments or questions? Last call.
Looks
I just
like
want to
that's-
say, go ahead.
Looks like that's it. Go ahead.
Well, I want to say thank you, EA Zoom, for allowing me to share astrology with you, and I look forward to doing it again.
We always love it, Kim Marie. Honestly, thank you so much. And we definitely look forward to the next one.
Oh, yes.
Yes, looking forward to the next one.
All right.